Nobody saw it coming when Jenny's life flipped in one brutal instant. The woman who'd crossed continents and cut every safety net for a promise of forever was now standing in a courthouse, watching the man she'd risked everything for get dragged away in handcuffs. The price tag? Nearly $300,000 in debt. The real currency was heartbreak. Everything she'd fought for, a marriage she'd built against every odd, the family she tried so hard to join, her own sense of self, started to crack and splinter with every headline, every rumor flying through group chats and fan pages. The world that tuned in for messy family dinners and chaotic pillows on the couch suddenly had front-row seats to a bankruptcy of trust nobody was prepared for. One minute Jenny was defending Sumit against skeptical friends and nosy relatives, believing love really could conquer in-laws, language gaps, and 2 decades of age difference. The next, she was staring down a mountain of debt she never signed up for, blindsided by more than betrayal. She was sideswiped by a secret so reckless, it left all the previous drama looking tame by comparison. There's a loneliness that sneaks in when your partner's problems aren't your problems anymore, but creditors and old wounds keep calling anyway. The more Jenny tried to hold the story together, the faster it all unraveled, with cameras rolling, neighbors whispering, and her own doubts echoing even louder. What turns a reality TV fairy tale into a cautionary tale about trust, loyalty, and survival? When did Jenny stop being the romantic underdog and start feeling like collateral for someone else's mistakes? People streaming the news and scanning the comments wondered if there was ever real love there, or if Jenny had only ever been a means to an end, a soft spot in a hard world Sumit didn't think twice about using. How do you rebuild in front of millions after finding out so much of your life was a house of cards? Everyone wants to know what Jenny will do next: run, stay, rebuild, forgive, or drag this mess into the daylight once and for all. But the real question isn't about who's to blame. It's about where the story goes when everything you thought was safe turns dangerous. And if you think the worst has already happened, wait until you see who comes knocking when Jenny tries to stand up for herself. The last time viewers checked in on Jenny and Sumit, people were still arguing about whether their love story was delusional, desperate, or stronger than anyone dared admit. It was messy, awkward, funny, and a magnet for every armchair therapist on the internet. Jenny, fresh from sunny California, was still navigating the not-so-glamorous side of moving in with your husband's traditional Indian parents, a kitchen that always smelled a little too spicy, impromptu lectures about how a real wife should behave, and a fridge where even your rum isn't safe from a mother-in-law's prying eyes. Of course, the honeymoon phase ended the minute family meetings turned into family interventions, and nights of laughter gave way to hushed arguments in dimly lit rooms. The age gap that once made them social media memes was now the least of their problems. In-laws don't come with warning labels or return policies, and Jenny found out the hard way you can love a person without ever really being accepted by their family. For 7 years, she lived almost like an expat wild card, dodging sideways glances, hopeful that one day awkward meals and chilly silences would warm up. But the tension never quite dissolved. It just shifted shape. The more she tried to fit in, the more she felt squeezed out. There's only so long a person can play guest and family member at the same time. Jenny joked about hiding in her bedroom all day, but the joke wore thin with every polite smile and every insistence from Sumit's mom that she drink less, clean more, and maybe stop embarrassing the family on TV. Meanwhile, Sumit kept promising he'd fight for her, that culture clashes and generational grudges couldn't touch the bubble they'd built. Whether you believe that or not depends on how many seasons you've endured, or maybe how many times you've cringed when someone's son refuses to tell his parents he's already married. Jenny's optimism was equal parts sweet and stubborn. She kept believing things would get better. This couple got married for real, on camera, not because the family approved, but because they finally wanted something to themselves. For one brief moment, there was giddy happiness, selfies with henna, borrowed jewelry, chaotic nuptials. Amid all the flashing lights and fake smiles, Jenny let herself believe she'd finally won. But as the cameras faded and the social media congratulations dried up, life sped back to normal, And normal for Jenny meant instability, laced with hope. She traded in sunsets over Palm Springs for the fluorescent gloom of in-law drama, and independence for a shot at togetherness she never really got. It started with little things. Family dinners with a pile of expectations, and not a lot of privacy. Shifting glances when money came up. The uneasy sense that everyone was waiting for someone, anyone, to mess up and give the neighborhood something to talk about. There was always an undercurrent, though, a kind of stress that hummed below the surface but never quite spilled out in words. Jenny felt it in the late-night phone scrolling, Sumit's nervous energy when money came up, his sudden interest in opening a business to help with bills while simultaneously avoiding actual job offers. She wanted to believe his promises, but there were too many times he seemed distracted, too many casual shrugs when she asked hard questions. Love can make a person stubbornly blind to warning signs until those signs knock down the front door. Then came the day everything changed. Jenny found herself alone in the apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and half-hearted apologies about a bounced rent check. And then the phone rang, first a polite reminder about an outstanding balance, then a much colder warning from people who didn't care about reality TV fame or awkward customs. They wanted money, and they wanted it yesterday. The size of the debt wasn't clear at first, but the panic was instant. Jenny confronted Sumit, expecting an embarrassed confession, only to be met with deflection and downplaying. He told her not to worry, that it was just a little bad luck, some investment that went sideways. The explanations grew thinner while Jenny's anxiety kept swelling. Most viewers at home laughed about the cafe storyline, but for Jenny, it was another desperate roll of the dice. Opening a restaurant with Sumit's family wasn't about chasing dreams. It was about keeping creditors at bay and the lights on. The first customer walked in, saw the chaos behind the counter, and walked right back out. It should have been a harmless sitcom moment, but the tension in the kitchen was as thick as last night's curry. Jenny's confidence took a nosedive. Even small fumbles, struggling with a coffee maker, missing an order, felt like proof she was in way over her head. Still, she tried to keep hope alive, telling herself every couple goes through rough patches. What she didn't say, at least not out loud, was how humiliated she felt, how the emotional fatigue was piling up. Her friends back home kept warning her, her daughters sent worried texts, but she replied with photos of family dinners, pretending everything was fine while feeling more trapped each day. Countless viewers keep asking if Jenny was in denial, or just too kind for her own good. There's a sort of resignation that comes from fighting for someone who keeps giving you half-truths in return. Jenny's patience only stretched so far. The next time she opened the bank app, it was obvious something was very wrong. A loan she'd never agreed to had her name typed next to Sumit's. When she brought it up, he threw out another wave of excuses, blaming everyone from market scams to relatives who needed temporary help. For the first time in years, Jenny felt her anger overtake her fears. This wasn't just about cultural difference or the family saga she signed up for. This was her future hanging in the balance, with nobody else looking out for her. As she pieced together the timeline of little mistakes turned colossal fraud, Jenny realized how much she'd sacrificed already, her savings, her pride, her time, her peace, and all the advice she'd ignored. Some viewers, watching the scene play out, wanted to reach through the screen and shake her awake. Others felt nothing but heartbreak for the woman now forced to choose between defending herself and staying loyal to someone who saw her as a first line of defense and a last resort. Tonight, Jenny sits at the edge of her own kitchen table, balancing heartbreak and hard math, waiting for Sumit to come home with answers, knowing the next conversation might be the one where everything changes forever. And no matter what he says, nothing about this night will be easily forgotten. The moment Jenny's world started to tip, it didn't happen with screaming or a camera in her face. It happened in the hollow quiet after midnight, when Sumit thought she was asleep. Debt collectors never call at convenient hours, and their threats are twice as cold when you can hear them echoing down a dark hallway. Jenny watched her husband shrink against the kitchen light, clutching his phone like it held the secret to their survival. Every time the caller said his name, another truth fell into view. Sumit owed much more than he'd ever confessed. Maybe in another reality, Those calls would have been a private shame, a setback only the two of them shared. But on reality TV, secrets are never safe. Word traveled, fans speculated, and distant relatives filled WhatsApp threads with half-baked theories. Sumit tried to keep up the act, telling Jenny and anyone else he could that everything was temporary, that he had a handle on it, that sometimes a man just needs a little luck to turn things around. But money isn't loyal to hope, and hope isn't a plan, especially when your past spending habits are about to become public spectacle. The next blow didn't come from outside. It came from the one place Jenny used to feel protected, her own relationship. One night, after another tense dinner where everyone picked at their food and avoided eye contact, Sumit asked Jenny for help. Not the sweet, vulnerable kind of help that brings couples closer, but the desperate kind that feels like a demand. He needed her savings, her support, her faith. If she converted, he argued, she'd understand how a good wife stands by her husband no matter what. Jenny had heard lines like that in Bollywood movies, but in the real world, it sounded a lot like manipulation seasoned with guilt. For years, her patience had been her best defense, the armor she wore against whispered doubts and outright rejection. Now it felt more like a trap than a shield. Everyone watching thought Jenny would finally break, storm out, raise her voice. Instead, she grew quiet, learning that silence speaks louder when you're tired of negotiating your worth. There's a special kind of loneliness that sets in once you realize the fight is only yours, that the person you trust most sees your loyalty as leverage against you. Jenny felt more alone than ever, stuck on the receiving end of problems multiplied by someone else's choices. Her sacrifices, the cross-country move, the loss of friends, the fragile peace with her in-laws, were supposed to buy her a happy ending, not a balance of guilt and disappointment. As she tried to make sense of the lies, she saw a version of herself she didn't recognize, less cheerful, less sure, always one step away from losing her temper. The cracks were spreading at the seams. The stakes kept climbing every day the debt hung over their heads, turning routine errands into anxiety attacks. Even something as simple as grocery shopping meant holding her breath at the register. The only thing heavier than her bags were the rumors outside, neighbors whispering, relatives asking invasive questions, strangers on the internet diagnosing her life from a distance. Every accusation pulled Jenny further away from the hope she'd clung to, reframing her story from a love worth fighting for to a cautionary tale about trust misplaced. Sumit, meanwhile, spun in circles, reassuring anyone who would listen that the next big win was right around the corner. Friends kept their distance. Family grew colder. He painted every new day as a fresh start, while Jenny counted invisible losses with every lie. It's hard to root for a comeback when each promise sounds worn out by morning. Those who've ever stayed loyal for too long will recognize the numbness that crept into Jenny's days. She moved like a ghost in her own home, facing the sadness of watching love morph into obligation. If anyone remembers the bright, bold woman who once demanded her own version of happiness, she was starting to fade, replaced by someone who measured hope in paychecks and sleepless nights. The saddest truth was how public the heartbreak became. Fans on every platform weighed in, blaming either Sumit's recklessness or Jenny's naivety. In-laws said she should have known what she was signing up for. Daughters said she deserved better. Jenny heard it all, let it sink in, and built up new walls no camera could catch. But there are only so many times you can carry the burden for two. The next blow arrived in a thick envelope, the overdue notice that didn't just threaten eviction, but detailed amounts she'd never imagined. All the ugly details, all the false hope, spelled out in bold print. That night, Jenny stared at her reflection, white-knuckling a mug of cold tea. Nobody filming knew what she was thinking. Was she angry at herself for letting this go so far, or at Sumit for never putting her first? People always say there's a breaking point. But for Jenny, it was a slow unraveling, each thread pulled by a new disappointment, a new confession, a new bill. And as the sun came up over a house built on shaky foundations, Jenny realized she'd spent years defending someone who might never defend her back. If you think you know how this story goes, you're not prepared for what Jenny does next. The backlash hit before the dust could even settle. Every fan group and gossip thread exploded the second Jenny's story surfaced online. Screenshots of reported debt numbers made their way from WhatsApp to Facebook to every reality TV meme page in existence. One moment people were debating recipes, the next they were swapping stories of betrayal, failure, and secondhand heartbreak like digital wildfire. It wasn't just the sum of money that shocked people, it was how easily years of trust unraveled with a single headline. Some comments sang with sympathy, calling Jenny a warrior for trying so hard, for staying loyal even as the odds stacked against her. Old fans, the ones who remembered the scene where she left her life in California behind, posted lines like, "She's been through enough, let her live." Others weren't as gentle. One viral reply painted Jenny as the textbook definition of hope gone wrong. Another asked with brutal honesty, would any of us survive living under a microscope with a family drama and this kind of betrayal on blast? You'd think everyone would land on the same side, but the debate kept spinning. For every supportive post, another spectator played armchair critic, dissecting Jenny's decisions or accusing her of chasing a fantasy. Some questioned how she didn't see it coming, how so much money could disappear before alarm bells started ringing. Others circled wagons, insisting love always makes you vulnerable to the worst mistakes. Regular people, strangers with their own scars, wondered if they too could be convinced to give up everything for a shot at belonging, only to lose themselves in the process. If you scrolled long enough, you'd see Jenny compared to everyone from fairy tale heroines to tragic cautionary tales. There were memes riffing on her patience, butting up against threads from viewers who wondered if loyalty is a flaw or a superpower. A late-night tweet with thousands of likes read, "Honestly, Jenny deserves her own redemption arc. If I moved halfway across the world and ended up with my mother-in-law throwing shade and my partner in debt, I'd go full Bollywood villain mode." The internet never ran out of ways to analyze her pain. For all the noise, the heart of it was simpler. Is Jenny the ultimate hero, hanging on to hope when others would have packed a bag and run? Or is she the victim of her own kindness, someone who kept giving chances until she had nothing left to offer herself? There was never an easy answer. Every fan put themselves in her shoes, measuring where their own boundaries would have snapped, or if they'd have lasted any longer. What came next depended on your view of loyalty, heartbreak, and survival. Some viewers saw courage in Jenny's refusal to run from the shame. Others saw the moment as a warning sign that there's a limit to how much any one person can take before the fight stops feeling worth it. The attention kept growing. Every post about the debt crisis led to follow-up debates about Sumit's behavior, whether his cultural excuses were real or a smokescreen, and why honest communication seems like the rarest ingredient in reality TV relationships. People started hunting for hidden clues in old episodes, wondering if the cracks had always been there or if everything really did change overnight. And if you think people were ready to move on, think again. New leaks hinted that even more drama waited behind the scenes. Rumors about possible legal fallout and wild speculation over where Jenny would go next kept the fanbase in suspense. Was she quietly preparing for a whole new life? Or was this the first act of a much bigger battle between independence and old loyalty? No one could guess which version of Jenny would step forward now that everyone saw her pain up close. The only certainty, the world wasn't done watching, and neither was the chaos. The next move promised fallout not just for Jenny and Sumit, but for every person who's ever had to choose between clinging to disaster and daring to start over. What would you do if all your secrets became public property in front of millions? Would you stand taller, or would you finally walk away for good? That answer was coming, and it was one nobody wanted to miss. The shock didn't break Jenny, though the cracks were everywhere. She walked through crowds that only saw her by the headlines above her name, past neighbors who gossiped with pity, friends who no longer called out of respect for her privacy, or maybe discomfort at her pain. For every fan who labeled her naive or stubborn, Jenny found a new kind of armor, survival on her own terms. She wasn't the first reality star to lose everything under the lights, but she refused to be one more tabloid casualty. The world expected collapse, or a screaming match on camera, or some messy public meltdown. What it got instead was a stubborn, aching calm. Long minutes stretched into nights filled with questions and regrets. That's where the quiet work began, sorting through old memories, facing love letters that now tasted like betrayal, boxing up the pieces of a life she'd built brick by brick on uncertain ground. She still flinched at the old what-ifs, but every sunrise dusted a little more resilience on the wounds. Jenny didn't have grand speeches for the cameras. She had silences, long walks, phone calls to daughters who reminded her she was more than whatever else the world decided to call her that week. The real twist wasn't in saving the marriage or any miraculous last-minute reunion. After years of bending, Jenny started carving out a space of her own. Small victories, laughing again with friends, sleeping through the night, cooking for nobody but herself, became life rafts. When Sumit's name trended again, it didn't hurt the same way. Somewhere in that distance, Jenny found a little dignity. Some healing looks like a new ring on your finger or a fresh start in another city, but sometimes healing starts when you stop apologizing for no longer wanting to hurt. It would be a lie to say she didn't feel the scars. There were still bills to handle, memories to avoid, and strings she might never untangle. But she stopped racing to prove anything. She refused to let the shame or disappointment define who she would become next. Fans rooted for her to get angry, but Jenny found something tougher than anger: acceptance. All those years spent defending her choices finally paid off in the quiet confidence she carried, even when nobody else was watching. Michael arrived more like a question mark than a savior, steady and kind in ways that didn't ask Jenny to change or shrink. For once, she was allowed to be exactly herself, grieving, hopeful, stubborn, a little wounded, but still here. Their connection wasn't about fixing the past, but about respecting it, holding space for new possibilities without forcing a storybook ending. Michael didn't need her to forget what happened, and Jenny didn't pretend she was healed overnight. They simply shared time, a coffee, a walk, a laugh she thought she had lost for good. There's a peace that comes from being seen and not judged. From being with someone whose presence lets you exhale all the pain, all the embarrassment, all the made-for-TV drama. Viewers saw shades of themselves in Jenny's comeback. The quiet mornings, the reckoning with old mistakes, the slow, proud rediscovery of trust, mostly in herself, before anyone else. She was nobody's cautionary tale. She became proof that not every mess is the end. Sometimes, rock bottom is just the ground you stand on when you're finally ready to grow new roots. The sting of betrayal still lingers, as does the shadow of public humiliation. But Jenny's story started drifting from headlines to something more private, more tender. An inside joke with a new partner, her laughter in a sunlit kitchen, the moment she looked in the mirror and stopped seeing a victim. She was a survivor, not because she overcame everything, but because she stayed true to herself when the cameras shut off and the world moved on. Viewers kept guessing if happiness could be possible after the spotlight. Did Jenny's story end with a wedding, or was the real victory finding herself again? She never gave anyone an easy answer, and maybe that's what kept people watching. Sometimes the only way out is through, and sometimes survival looks a lot like hope in a brand new form. The next turn in Jenny's journey may surprise everyone, herself included. Jenny's story didn't end in that chaos. The storm around her marriage might have threatened to drown her, but she was never the kind of person who let disappointment be the last word. After years of struggling for a seat at the family table, for scraps of trust, for every reason to believe in what she built, she decided to finally bet on herself. For the fans who lost patience or blamed her for staying too long, Jenny became something unexpected, proof that survival means knowing when to stop sacrificing, when to call the bluff, and when to walk out with your head high, even if your heart stays bruised. Sifting through all the broken promises, she found some things worth keeping: her self-respect, her sense of humor, her small daily victories. Divorce wasn't the ending she'd dreamed of, but it was the honest one. Jenny learned the difference between giving up and letting go, and that lesson colored everything she did after the last camera stopped rolling. Old fears never totally left. Sometimes she caught herself second-guessing every choice, replaying old conversations, measuring what could have been next to the freedom of starting over. Still, Leaving wasn't about running away or dramatics for the audience's benefit. It was the slow, determined choice to reclaim what wasn't gone after all, the capacity to make her own decisions, to refuse to wear someone else's guilt like a name tag, to say, "I'm enough," without waiting for anyone else's approval. Jenny stopped looking for rescue. She opened herself to the everyday bravery of trusting herself again, setting boundaries that protected her from any new tide of heartbreak. Her story became a blueprint for anyone who's ever loved too hard and lost more than they could afford. People watched Jenny step out of that old apartment and into an uncertain future, cheering or arguing, as they always have. For some, she was the heroine who finally realized her own worth. For others, she was the example of what happens when loyalty isn't returned. Social media kept the debate alive, but Jenny kept her focus small, on mornings that didn't start with dread, on new friends who valued her voice, on rediscovering laughter she thought she'd lost for good. Let others argue over hashtags. She was busy building her second act. This isn't the plot twist reality TV usually delivers. There were no screaming matches or doors slammed for effect. Jenny's glow-up happened quietly, almost stubbornly, in the spaces where old wounds used to ache. She slept better, knowing the only person left to stand up for was herself. Maybe the big takeaway is about resilience or forgiveness, or maybe it's just as simple as remembering that being knocked down in public doesn't mean you never get up again. Jenny showed viewers what real boundaries look like: messy, honest, painful, and absolutely necessary. She learned the hard way: when love turns into obligation, the only healing comes from drawing a line and keeping it, no matter who begs or bargains. There's a difference between being patient and being taken for granted. Jenny taught her fans to trust their own instincts, to listen when things feel wrong, and to leave before the story turns tragic for good. Every episode, every rumor, every internet comment was a test of her endurance. In the end, Jenny passed it, not by saving her marriage, but by saving herself. For anyone out there who wonders if they'd have the courage to do the same, her story is a quiet invitation to choose yourself, one small moment at a time. If you thought the drama was finished, think again. There are whispers of new alliances forming, relatives with scores to settle, and questions simmering about what, or who, truly drove the final wedge between Jenny and Sumit. Was it money, family, pride, or was something else at play the cameras never caught? Some say there's a new storm brewing behind the scenes, the kind that could drag old friends and new enemies right into the spotlight. Viewers, you haven't seen the last of this saga. The scars may be healing, but the questions are only getting louder, and next time, someone you least expect might step into the story and turn everything upside down all over again.